welcome to a class that prepares you for your Leaving Cert physics exam. You will find the physics guide in the very first part of book 1. So it goes through all the exam paper, how many marks for each and so on. So I'm going to work my way through that on the board and explain it to you in detail. Essentially, what is the content of your entire course? I know you've got books with lots of different chapters, but essentially, at the end of the day, everything is made up of light and sound, including waves. That's an important section. I think everybody should do that simply because it's not too difficult. Then we have mechanics. Then we have electricity. Then we have modern physics like fusion and fission and alpha and beta decay. And that, by the way, includes the option of particle physics. And finally, we have heat, which is very short. So essentially, the entire content for the physics exam is made up of 5 major topics. Now, will I be able to leave some of those topics out? Well, we will explore that as we go through the paper. You will find that particular section, that there, is in book 1. The guide that I'm going to talk about in this particular lesson is also in book 1. Mechanics is in book 2. Electricity is in book 3. And the modern physics and the heat, they're in book 4. Your books contain everything. They contain nice Leaving Cert questions that I've chosen. They contain all the solutions to all the numerical problems. So everything you need is in the book to get yourself ready for the physics exam. Let me talk about the physics paper. Well, the physics paper, how long is it? It's a 3-hour paper. I think that's plenty of time. I don't hear too many students having time pressures with that. So I think it's quite generous, as long as you organize yourself very well, which I will show you during this lesson. The number of marks for the physics paper, there are 400 marks altogether. It's usually on in the morning from 9:30 to 12:30, sometime in the middle of June. It's made up of 2 sections. Section A is the experiments, the mandatory experiments that you're supposed to do in the lab. And section B is the theory, all the other stuff in your notes and so on. It's broken down like this. In here, I've got 5 questions, and you've got to do 3 out of 5 questions. Each of these questions is 40 marks. 3 by 40 gives me 120 marks altogether for this particular section. How long should I spend on each question? I suggest 20 minutes per question. And that means in total, you're talking about spending 1 hour max on this particular part of the paper. I also tell students that that's where they should start. Why? Well, you're always slightly nervous going into the exam. And the Section A part is a lot easier than the Section B part. So you're going to build up a bit of confidence. A lot of teachers say you should read the entire paper before you start the exam. Well, I wouldn't do that. You read the entire paper and you look beside you and someone has already done 1 question. Because the thing about Section A and Section B is they're mutually exclusive. So one doesn't affect the other. There's no point in reading Section B at this stage. I'm telling you to start with Section A. Pick out your 3 experiments out of 5, which you'll pick very quickly. And just get stuck into that and don't even look at Section B. Because, you only start thinking about things that are there and it'll only upset you. Just concentrate on Section A, get that done. You've got a maximum of 1 hour to finish it. And then you've built up your confidence. And now I'm ready to get stuck into Section B. So this part then is 120 marks. That means out of 400, that will leave me with 280 marks for Section B. So Section B is harder. You've got to do in Section B, I've got to do 5 out of 9 questions. Each question is 56 marks. So you're talking about 5 by 56 marks. That would give me a total of 280 marks. I'll go through each question in detail. I'll advise you on questions that I think are nice questions to do and others that I would think about. We'll also talk about possibilities about leaving stuff out because we do have quite a good deal of choice. How long should I spend on each question here? Again, probably about 20 minutes per question. But if you want, some questions are a little bit tougher, require a little bit more thinking. You can stretch it to 25 minutes. So one or two you could stretch to 25 minutes, and that will still leave me with a little bit of time afterwards to review the paper. And if there's lots of time then, I can go about doing an extra question. But of course, don't do the extra question until you get all your main questions done. So in other words, get 3 done there and get 5 done there. Then if you have time, go back and do an extra experimental question if you wish. So we're talking about 20 to 25 minutes to complete that. So let's get stuck into section A. So let's go through all the experiments that are there. And how do I study for experiments? It's actually very easy to study for experiments. And you can actually do it very, very quickly. You could actually kill all your experiments over a weekend of good hard work. So as I said, the experiments are section A. You do that first. You don't look at section B at this stage. It's 120 marks, and you've got to do 3 out of 5 questions. So we've got our 5 questions there. You'll rapidly pick out, by looking through the questions, which ones you want to do, which are your favorite questions. I don't think you'll have any problem doing that. I said that section A is easier than section B because you're going to do the same thing all the time. You're going to draw a label diagram of the experiment. You're going to draw a graph or carry out a calculation. And then they're going to ask you something about the experiment. How do you make the experiment better? These are called sources of error. And certain experimental details. So it's easy. So you've got your 5 questions. What are my list of experiments? Well, there are 25 experiments altogether on the Leaving Cert. The list of experiments, let's have a look at them. These are in your notes. I put a little asterisk beside some of them. GM1 there. I'm talking about the higher level course. So in the higher level course, they won't ask you this directly. They might ask it as part of M3 or M4. But anything with an asterisk beside it is rarely asked, or if at all. So the mechanics experiments, M1 and M2 are to measure velocity and acceleration. They won't ask you that directly on the higher level Leaving Cert physics paper, but they might ask you a little bit of that as part of M3 and M4. So essentially, I would say you've got 6 experiments to do on mechanics, M3 to M8. What about heat? There's 4 experiments on heat. Again, the first 2 there, they rarely ask. Sound, we've got 3 experiments. Light, we have 5 experiments. But this one here, L3, where you have to find the refractive index of a glass by the method of real and apparent depth. Again, they've hardly ever asked that. And then finally, with electricity, you've got 5 experiments. So in total, the number of experiments we have, mechanics, we've got M1. I call the mechanics experiments by M. M1 to M8. Heat, H1 to H4. Sound, S1 to S3. Light, L1 to L5. And electricity, E1 to E5. Altogether, that amounts to 25 experiments. How many experiments could I safely do for the Leaving Cert exam? I would say you could safely do about 18 experiments. You could leave out the ones that I put a little star beside. Also, you may decide, actually, I'm not going to do the sound experiments. They're only going to ask one sound experiment anyway. And you've got a choice of 3 out of 5. So if I left out the sound experiments, I'd be safe. Or I could leave out the heat experiments. I mean, heat is very safe to leave out. They ask a heat experiment once every 3 or 4 years. And you still have a good choice. So you could leave out the sound or you could leave out the heat. Leaving out a mechanics, leaving out light, leaving out electricity is a little bit tricky because they could ask you to mechanics, they could ask you to electricity, they could ask you to light. So you're taking a little bit of risk, you're reducing your choice. But basically you want to be hitting for about 18 experiments. The experiments are always, they seem to be, mechanics seems to be question 1 every year. And question 5 seems to be electricity every year. But that's just the way it seems. That's not written in stone. Now, how do I study the experiments? Well, I actually think this is very easy. Here's the 3 steps that I would say to study. First of all, I'd watch the video. On the platform, you've got all the experiments done individually. And I do them in association with a Leaving Cert question. So it's a great way to learn. So watch the video and you're brought through a Leaving Cert question and we do the experiment, we explain it in great detail. That's the first step. You can watch that a number of times. I want you to make a flashcard. I used to do this for students, but I said, hang on, the benefit in making the flashcard is doing it yourself. And what you want to capture in your flashcard or your index card is the essential information. This is essential information. You actually shouldn't go into the exam unless you know this information. What's the essential information that I need to know for every single experiment? Well, here's an example of an experiment. I'm talking about S3, which is the sonometer experiment, where you measure frequency and tension. You want to see how the frequency varies with the tension in the string. In your flashcard, draw a label diagram. I just started it there. I didn't finish it off. Just draw your label diagram because that's the first thing they ask in practically every question. Draw a label diagram. That's easy marks. You should literally be able to do your label diagram in about a minute, minute and a half. I don't want a work of art. You're wasting your time doing a work of art. I can't draw. Just use your ruler and draw a nice label diagram. Then the next piece of essential information you need is the graph. About half the experiments have graphs, but you have to draw what's called the suitable graph. That's what they'll always say. So for example, in this experiment, they'll give you a series of results of frequency and tension. If you draw frequency against tension, you'll get practically no marks. You have to know that the tension, I have to get the square root of the tension, root t, and do a little sketch of what your graph should look like when you're finished. So know what every suitable graph looks like for every experiment that has a graph. Or there may be a formula. So we might have to use the formula here as well. So write down the formula on your flashcard and write down what page number you'll find it on the table book. And then write down 3 or 4 experimental details, little things about the experiment, sources of error, precautions, how do you make it better, put a lid on the calorimeter to keep the heat in, little things like that. Put down 3 or 4 for every single experiment. And that's essential information. That's what I need before I go into the exam. Look, you can't go into the exam if I don't know the suitable graph. If I don't know that root t, I have to get the square root of all the tensions, then you're kind of wasting your time. So you will do flashcards for all your experiments, 18 to 25 experiments. You could do them over a weekend and then just keep on looking at them. And then finally, I'd read the method. The experiments are all in your notes. So read the method a number of times. And then you just practice some Leaving Cert questions on that particular experiment. And then I've done all my study. So studying for experiments is no big deal. In your guide, by the way, I've done a sample question of a particular experiment. So let's just have a look at that. So that's just before your list of experiments. So I've done a sample question, actually one of the harder experiments I can ask, which is Joule's law. So I bring you through it. I give you all the details and all the hints. I tell you exactly how to draw the graph, how you get all your marks by labeling axes properly, marking at least 6 correct points, straight line graph, line of best fit. But I also talk about this during the videos as well. So there's 2 places where you'll get it. You can look at that sample question, because I go through absolutely everything you need to get the perfect experimental exam question done. And I also do that as part of each video. So what will I say? Studying for the experiments, no big deal.